Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Despite President Trump declaring the war with Iran over, tensions in the Middle East remain high, with the Strait of Hormuz still disrupted and nuclear negotiations unresolved. To assess whether US objectives have been achieved and what comes next, we're joined by Mariana Budjeryn from MIT's Center for Nuclear Security Policy. Mariana, welcome to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. So restricting Iran's ability to produce nuclear weaponry has been a stated goal of Israel's for decades, and most U.S. administrations as well. However, President Trump is the first U.S. president who's actually done anything about it. How would you assess the level of success achieved in that goal?
Let's start by saying that nuclear nonproliferation policy, not just towards Iran, but towards most states in the international system, has been a persistent part of U.S. foreign policy. So it was not just Iran that was singled out for nonproliferation or for basically an issue with developing military uses of its nuclear energy program. That has been that the world and the United States in particular has tried to dissuade them from doing so. In terms of Iran specifically, there have been numerous attempts to try and prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Of course, long-term negotiations back earlier in the previous decade have led to the conclusion of the 2015 JCPOA deal, the so-called Iran deal, that severely limited Iran's nuclear weapons program, that should say, and the level of enrichment of the uranium that Iran was allowed to enrich. So it can be said that President Trump is the only president who did anything about the Iranian nuclear program. That would be unfair. It is true, though, that President Trump is the only U.S. president who decided to use military means to try and prevent and stop this program. Now, this is a second iteration of the use of military force against the Iranian nuclear program. The first was the joint Israeli-American operation back in June 2025. And if we are to follow President Trump's statements back then, the Iranian nuclear program was all but obliterated entirely. So it remains somewhat mysterious why this next campaign against Iran was really necessary if the stated goal was to limit the nuclear program specifically.
Okay, let's go back to what you said about the JCPOA in 2015. Yes, Iran had agreed to limit its development of nuclear weaponry, but it didn't really do that, did it? I mean, that's how it achieved the status it had reached in June last year, which attracted the attacks from the US and Israel. So is Iran an actor that is playing fair?
Actually, that's not quite fair to say of Iran. The JCPOA was a specifically nuclear deal. And in its conclusion, and a score of states took place. The representatives from the European Union, France, Germany, and Russia actually cooperated in trying to structure the deal in such a way that would prevent Iran from channeling its nuclear program towards military means. And in that, actually, the deal was quite successful. So when in 2018, if memory serves, President Trump actually withdrew from the deal, it was not because Iran wasn't playing fair or was breaking this particular deal. The point of criticism by President Trump back then was that the deal was too narrow, was too narrowly focused on just the nuclear activity of Iran, but did not take into account other, activities such as sponsoring proxies, supporting proxies all over the Middle East, such as its missile program and missile technologies development, and so forth. So President Trump actually withdrew from the deal that worked quite well to limit the nuclear program specifically, whatever its other limitations might have been in other areas. And so, of course, when the deal fell apart, there was nothing legally binding in a sense to restrain Iran from pursuing greater levels of enrichment, which it had went on to do. This is not to defend Iran. Of course, Iran should be doing none of these activities at all, since Iran is a member of the nonproliferation treaty and is bound by the obligations under the treaty to use its peaceful nuclear program for peaceful uses only. So not to divert that technology towards military uses. But of course, it has, since the deal fell apart, it has continued to do so and enrich uranium to levels that are well beyond anything that a civilian program would require. And now basically we're in quite a difficult situation where Iran could not be convinced to return to a similar deal simply because it had no trust in the United States to observe it, or no assurance that the United States would not withdraw from it again. As a earnest desire to develop nuclear weapons, or simply as a point of leverage, I can't quite tell. It proceeded to get very dangerously close to the bomb. That is until the Israeli-American strikes of June last year.
Right. So had the strike not happened, Iran would be getting the nuclear bomb any time now, right? Is that in summary of what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that Iran actually did get closer to or increase its capability to develop a nuclear bomb. That is, to get the uranium enriched to 60%. We know about 400 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. That is clearly not something that could be used for peaceful purposes, whatever Iran might say. So enrichment levels for fuel for nuclear power plants is normally around 5 or 6%. For some of the advanced reactors, which Iran does not even have, it could be up to 19%, certainly not beyond 20. So when we see enrichment up to 60%, this is clearly a sign that something else is going on. But this is not to say that if you have this nuclear material enriched to 60%, that you essentially are within minutes to a bomb. There's still quite a lot of work to be done to forge this enriched uranium into a usable nuclear fuel, to design a warhead, to test a warhead, to mate that warhead with some kind of delivery system, whether it's a missile or a missile, whether ground-based or air-based. All of that is very sophisticated technology, and all of that needs to be tested, right? So there's still quite a bit of work between having 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, 60% or otherwise, to the actual bomb.
Right. Now, it wasn't just the US and Israel that didn't want Iran to have the bomb. I mean, the Gulf countries felt uncomfortable with it as well, and they're quite supportive, perhaps tacitly, of the attack. But let's focus for a second on Russia and China. How comfortable would they feel if Iran were to have a bomb?
So both Russia and China are also members of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. Now, that treaty that went into effect in 1970 and now comprises 191 states in this world. It's one of the most comprehensive arms control regimes ever created. And under the treaty, only 5 countries are recognized as nuclear weapon states, including, of course, the United States, Britain, France, and Russia and China. So certainly it is in their interest, and it's part of their international obligations not to aid other states in acquiring nuclear weapons. All other states in the international system joined this treaty as non-nuclear weapon states, including Iran. There are notable exceptions. There are states that never joined that treaty. For instance, Israel is one of them, and Israel has gone on to develop its own nuclear deterrent, its own nuclear weapons, as well as India, Pakistan, and the latest addition to that club is North Korea. Now, the idea is that everyone in the international system should be interested to keep the number of nuclear states at least what it is now, and away from increasing, because the more fingers there are on more nuclear buttons, the more dangerous it is for everyone involved. So it's not just the Gulf states, it's not just the United States that are interested in nuclear nonproliferation. It should also be Russia and China. Now, we have not seen direct assistance, at least, not from the sources that I know of Russia or China towards Iranian program. But of course, as the international kind of security situation deteriorated over the past several years due to the war in Ukraine and other factors, Russia and China have not been such staunch critics of the Iranian transgressions in the nonproliferation space as should be expected of major stakeholders in the nonproliferation regime.
Right. I mean, in fact, one might say that actually Russia and Iran have got closer since Russia invaded Ukraine, with the Shahed drones being supplied to Russia from Iran, and the technology and many other things. I mean, could it be, you think, that Russia is actually benefiting from the conversation being focused on Iran and its nuclear ambitions? It's benefiting because then the eye isn't on what Russia is doing in Ukraine. I mean, could this be a political play, in your opinion?
That certainly is the case, that Russia has emerged one of the main beneficiaries of the U.S. involvement in the Middle East, not least because of the soaring fuel prices. Russia is laughing all the way to the bank, since its budget is largely dependent on the sale of, oil and gas globally. And so if there were, although these things, as you rightly point out, are incredibly interconnected, if there were any hope, slim though it was before the war in the Middle East, that perhaps Russia and Ukraine, with the momentum created by the Trump administration, could agree on some sort of ceasefire or armistice for the time being, I think those hopes are as good as dashed at this point.
Okay. Now, is there anything that the countries outside Iran who are trying to stop Iran getting the bomb, if I can put it that crudely, I suppose, is there anything that they should be doing that they're not currently doing?
Well, when military force is already getting employed in the Middle East, I think there's certainly, you don't want to escalate the situation even further in military terms, but there certainly should be some kind of regional effort to try and reinvigorate the process of nuclear restraint in this region in particular. For instance, there has been a long-standing proposal to have a fissile material agreement regionally between the actors in the Middle East, under which the countries would agree to not to enrich, not to enrich uranium or otherwise try and attain other nuclear material as a way of that would mutually benefit the security of all actors involved. So this is one direction to pursue. But of course, generally, I think, as we speak, the Non-Proliferation Treaty is now, the members are convening in New York for a review conference that happens every 5 years. And this conference, it's not over yet, but the predictions of experts are that unfortunately the non-proliferation regime in general is in a rather dire state and could result in a rather moribund treaty, since again major actors are not vested in its development. So that puts, I suppose, greater pressure on the middle powers, including those from the Middle East, to get more involved in this non-proliferation treaty process and to try to buttress this regime in distress,
right,
in order to prevent not just Iran but other states from pursuing nuclear weapons.
Indeed, much food for thought there. Mariana Budjeryn, thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a wonderful day. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.